Hey everybody, welcome to Stigma Busters monthly podcast. My name's Scott. I'm going to be your co-facilitator, co-host, co-peer, co-recovery warrior today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening, watching online, watching on YouTube or any other platform that you may have found us. This week, we're going to be talking about codependencies, the different types, a few different questions to just help elaborate and help identify how codependency could be impacting our recovery and how we could ideally support those around us with finding, searching, identifying, or implementing a pathway of recovery of their choice. So again, my name's Scott. Thank you so much for being here. This is a completely free space. Just keep in mind that we are talking about primarily substance use disorders and mental health diagnosis. So some of this content is unfiltered, unedited on purpose because we want to bring you as raw support and information that we can. All of our resources are backed up online from accredited resources. And so just keep in mind that, if something does trigger you, please reach out to any of us, any of our agencies, or any support system or people that you have in your own life so we can help overcome those barriers. I'm joined today by Sarah Santos with HCVS. She is our New York Matters regional collaborator. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us again. And then Brian with Recovery Center of America. He's our newest addition to the co-host family here with Stigma Busters. It's really just an honor for him to keep accepting, the invitation. I think he may not know it, but I feel he's kind of almost become a staple here because his experience and knowledge in the topics that we have upcoming over the next year are really going to bring a lot of really great content and feedback to the listeners. And of course, Deshaun Gaskins from Independent Living. He's one of our peer recovery specialists. Deshaun, thanks for being here. It's good to see you as always. And then Crystal Costello is with MHA Duchess. She's one of their peer advocates and certified recovery peer advocates, or SERPA. And Crystal, I think you have something to show everybody.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm so honored to be here yet again with all my friends. So I put together a couple of slides just to discuss codependency today. We have it.
Yeah.
Good. So something I just want everyone to think about, there's just a couple of questions that we want everyone to keep in mind when talking about codependency. So wondering, do you feel like a bad person when you've made a mistake? Do you identify as a hyper independent person? Do you struggle with rejection? And do you have trouble asking for help? These are just some of the things that we came up with just to keep in mind while discussing codependency. We're going to dive a little deeper into this today. So we're going to talk about codependency, like really what is it and how does it affect us and our relationships, right? So moving into the definition of codependency, this is the MHA national definition, which may be a little heavy and a little wordy. However, I think it really covers it. So this says, codependency is a learned behavior that can be passed down from one generation to another. It is an emotional and behavioral condition that affects an individual's ability to have a healthy, mutually satisfying relationship. It is also known as relationship addiction because people with codependency often form or maintain relationships that are one-sided, emotionally destructive, and/or abusive. This disorder was first identified about 10 years ago as the result of years of studying interpersonal relationships in families of alcoholics. Codependent behavior is learned by watching and imitating other family members who display this type of behavior. I also have another definition that is a little bit more simplified. It's characterized by excessive emotional or psychological reliance on a partner, typically one who requires support on account of illness or addiction. Those of us who identify as a codependent, we tend to be the caretaker and we want to feel needed and we become people pleasers. So finding a partner that constantly needs us, that's where we find our value and we find our worth, because we don't necessarily find our worth within ourselves yet, right? I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions about the definition.
Sure, yeah.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Sarah.
well, I think that it's interesting because it's so accepted and pretty understood in the field of addiction that childhood trauma, negative ACE scores likely lead to substance use later in life. But I think oftentimes that's not really broken down so much. So I'm really looking forward to kind of digging deep into this conversation today, because I think codependency is something that is oftentimes born out of the kind of trauma that we recognize leads to addiction. But also, as we get further along in the presentation, we're going to see that it becomes a self-feeding sort of mechanism, and it perpetuates the same sort of trauma that we experience when we're younger. So just kind of setting the stage for where we'll be getting a little bit deeper later on, I wanted to just point that out. And again, thank you so much for putting this together, because it's important to talk about.
Thank you, Sarah. Scott?
Yeah, Sarah pretty much touched on all of it. And I just realized that, the disorder was first identified 10 years ago. It was as a result of studies with relationships with families of alcoholics. I just want to call it out there. This is not only associated with alcoholism, it's associated with, cross disabilities across the spectrum. So it's not just someone that has alcoholism or is living with alcoholism, but it could be any substance. It can also be mental health. It could also be a physical disability. It could also just be based, like Sarah said, any sort of trauma from earlier in your life that has carried over and impacted your current and future relationships.
Not
And I
only
guess,
that, I apologize, Sarah.
no, go ahead, Deshaun.
Not only that, being that it stated that it started from a young age, even if you have like no trauma or anything, it's all learned behaviors, so even if you don't think of it as traumatic, even if you don't think of it as anything like that, you learn it based off of those who you are around. So like I said, even if it's not true, it wasn't traumatic to you, but you've seen your mother with your father or your uncle or your brother, if you see them do it, you think, oh, okay, this is how it's supposed to be, so this is how I'm going to grow up, and this is what I'm going to do. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be traumatic or anything like that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this slide is actually going to go perfectly into my next comment. So I'll let you take it from here, Crystal.
I was just going to say that was a perfect segue into the factors leading to codependency, honestly. I'll just go over what they say. The first one is lack of love and nurture, rejection and abandonment, family addiction, obviously, we've already been discussing, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and mental or physical illness. So for me, I want to say from my childhood, it would be lack of love and nurture and a feeling of abandonment. My parents got divorced when I was very young, and I always felt very displaced. I never really felt like I had a place of belonging, and I never really felt loved or cared for as a child. So that's kind of where my codependency stemmed from, and my perfectionism and my OCD and my, like Sarah said, my hyper independence, having to control all situations. That's where a lot of it stems from, that childhood trauma of those things. Go ahead, Sarah. What did you want to add to that?
Yeah, on a similar note, for me, it was less about substance use in the home or anything like that, but it was there was a series of deaths on my mother's side of the family where people were very ill, and it had a negative impact on my mother's mental health. And so for me, I really wanted to make things easier for her. I recognized that she was struggling so much, and so I took this caretaker role. But part of that also, when you're a child, that's the caretaker role is really not meant for you. And impacts your ability to develop a sense of self, because so much of the praise that I received from being younger was helping out with looking over the kids and never being a problem and being this good kid. But that's not an identity, right? That's shrinking whomever I might be. It made it so that I felt like I couldn't make mistakes because that would put a more burden on a family that was already burdened. And so it was, kind of indirectly a lack of love, but more so just related to all of this death that was sort of happening, and my response to want to make myself smaller and take care of those around me. And then, the interesting thing is, which Dashawn was talking about, was that then you learn that behavior, and unfortunately, until you unpack it, you're kind of stuck with it, right? So to caretaking for my family in that circumstance wasn't, it was difficult, but the real trauma came later in life when I was caretaking for people that, didn't have that love, and that my 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 wellness in mind, and so,
Absolutely.
it's a developmental sort of thing as well.
Absolutely. It
makes you
unfolded
think.
a lot of the same way for myself with the caretaking role at a really young age. And, I didn't have addiction in my home either, but it led into me becoming involved in relationships that were dealing with addicts. I wasn't using personally, but the people that I was involved with were, because I thought that I could rescue them and I could make them better. And if I could make them better, then that made me better. Right. So it was this vicious cycle. And my mom was always telling me from when I was a teenager that I was codependent. I was like, yeah, right. I am not codependent. I work, I pay my own bills. I'm very independent. I do what I have to do. Like, who are you to tell me that I'm codependent? And I never understood what she meant until I understood what she meant.
It makes you
Deshaun,
think
did
the
you want to
term,
say?
yeah, the term, if and I'm sure you've all heard this as younger men and women, you're so mature for your age,
Mm.
right? That saying, like, and it's just like it starts to at that point you're thinking, well, do I take this as a compliment or because at that point it's like, yes, okay, maybe I am, but I had no choice to be, like think about it like that.
Absolutely. That is, I hope we all understand now that if we recognize a child is mature for their age, they probably need some extra help. This is prevention beyond chasing the substance, right? You see a
Yes.
kid who's acting like they're 30 years old at 12, they need some extra support in their lives. It's rarely, the child's choice. Exactly, Deshawn.
I think Crystal touched on a huge point, and it made me even look at myself. Is we can be codependent years after we put substances down and we've recovered from that harm or trauma, or continue to grow through our trauma. And she said, trying to save people. I can't save anybody, but how often do we try to, give so much energy into someone, but they're not willing to accept the help. But because we have, at some level, right, big or small, we still have some sort of codependency within us because we want to help and support and save them from going through the same things that we experienced, because we know
Absolutely.
we know what it's like, right? Our lived experience. Well, you don't have to go down that road, because I'll tell you, I've been down there. There ain't nothing good down there, nothing but darkness. But I can save you from doing that. No, I can't.
Well, I think
And even on the other side of that token, Scott, like my addiction is directly related to my codependency. I was married to someone for 12 years who was addicted, and I became addicted through that relationship because I became him. I did everything he wanted me to do. I allowed him to control me. Whatever he said, I did, because that's the only way that I was going to make him happy, right? And that's the only way that I was going to be happy, is if he was happy. I literally became him. I was addicted to all of the same things that he was, and I never saw it until I was away from it, right? And I started to heal from it. But looking back at that now is like, wow, like the lack of self and the lack of identifying with who I am as a person. I just was like floating along in life for years, just like in survival mode. It's crazy.
Well,
That's
because
why I
you're,
always say I wear like the cape, the
yeah,
codependency cape, right? Like it's just a thing. Go ahead,
because
Scott.
we're taught that our value is what we're able to provide others. And so that's where our sense of self comes from. The more that we're able to do something for other people, the more we feel strong in this totally flimsy sense of self. And that's where it leads to, you know, accepting behaviors, which I think we'll get onto in this PowerPoint, but, you know, being overly loyal, accepting behaviors that you really shouldn't.
And
I think too,
I don't think they heard you, Sarah.
For
I don't think they heard you, Sarah.
the people in back, walk away.
Go ahead, Brian. What did you want to say?
no, I think it's at the core of it, we're saying the same things, but like for the core of where I had codependency characteristics in the core of my addiction, the core were the same. It was, you know, caring too much what others thought about me. The opinions of others mattered more, and I was more worried about the outside versus, you know, recovery for me has been an inside job, and it's the same thing with codependency. It's about the recovery of codependency is about establishing your self-esteem and doing the inside work. And as long as we're in our addiction, whatever our drug of choice may be, or in codependency, it could be our you know, our drug of choice, or it could be another person, it could be a family member, that we care more about them than ourselves. And until we figure that out and we do the inside job, you know, we're in a difficult situation. And someone said to me the other day that everybody's recovering from something. Everybody's in recovery. And I think that in this case with codependency, and it can shift throughout you guys talked about it, Deshaun, you said it perfectly, like where my codependency started when I was a child is different than where I was as an old man, but it's still there and I have to be aware of it. And now that I can be aware of it and can say, ooh, you know, is this healthy? And check myself and get back into recovery. It works.
I like what he
Yeah.
said when he said recovery from codependency. Recovery from codependency, because you don't think about those things. We think codependency is a natural part of it, but you can recover from that too.
Specifically, yes.
Specifically.
Yes.
Sorry, because I know you want to go on the slides, but exactly, Deshaun, like, and if I'm not aware of my toolbox and my principles and my recovery from my addiction, then I could relapse and get off. But the same thing with codependency. If I'm not aware that I'm in recovery from that, and I work on those, you know, deficiencies and work on those unhealthy habits, then I can slip back into codependency as well.
Absolutely. That's 1,000%. For me, a relapse is not a relapse with my drug. A relapse is a new relationship. It's some new random person who is validating my feelings or showing me some attention that I need in that moment. That can be a relapse. That's a codependency relapse, which is a totally different kind of relapse. And people don't think about that. That's relationship addiction, unhealthy, toxic relationship addiction, being addicted to the drama, addicted to the chaos, addicted to needing someone to need you, right? Like finding people that, you know, that's why like codependents are magnetized by narcissists, which is like a whole nother topic. But a narcissist and a codependent relationship, oh boy, they're like a match made in heaven because they just feed off of each other.
Can we curse?
And
Can we say HE double hockey sticks? The match is not a match made in heaven, but yeah.
There's
Yeah.
the gasoline and there's the
I
flame.
am
you know,
I'm a
like,
living testimony to that.
Same.
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 And I emphasize living.
Living. Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I just pulled up some symptoms of codependency, and I think that we've already hit on a lot of these. Denial, which was my number one, like, no way, I'm not codependent. There's no way, no how. Caretaking, we've already talked a lot about that. And from the caretaking becomes like the controlling thing, right? And dysfunctional communication and dysfunctional boundaries, right? Let's just talk about boundaries for a second. I didn't know what a boundary was if it smacked me in the face, because like everybody else's boundaries were just overlapping with mine, and I just did whatever they wanted me to do. There was no like me speaking up and advocating for myself or saying no to someone. No was not like a complete sentence ever in my life. I never said no. Whatever anyone needed me to do, I was always there. and you just lose yourself. You lose yourself in other people, and you again have no self-identity. It's scary, really.
I just want to emphasize that, Crystal, because I think I assumed it was going to come up at some point in this podcast, and I'm not surprised it came up on the third slide. But for those listeners, no is a complete sentence. The greatest tool that you have to overcome codependency is the word no.
Can I just say, in the past 2 years, have been really focusing on my codependency, and I will just say no. I will just practice saying no by myself in different versions, just scenarios I might encounter, even just as a practice, because it's so hard to say no. And that dysfunctional communication ties into the fear of rejection. Right? You're concerned about upsetting the other person because if the person's upset with you, well, that's your whole sense of self. And so it makes it very difficult to communicate difficult things. It makes it really hard to say no because you want to please other people, whatever that means at whatever cost. And so as you're building up that self-esteem, I really encourage just practice saying no, because building up your self-esteem from years of trauma, it takes a long time. It's not a linear process, but you can get right to work and just saying no. Your brain is a muscle. You get used to saying it and it becomes easier over time. Still working on it, but yeah.
Agreed. Work in progress. Definitely. And then the other one, the last one, is problems with intimacy. And this just ties in again to like the toxic relationships and, everything, literally everything, right, Scott? And it's just so hard because if you don't have a sense of self, how do you know like what you like or what you want or what pleases you? Or if you want to say no in that moment, you are allowed to. But most of us don't, because we want to please the other person, and it's not about us at the end of the day. And that's really scary. It's sad to think about.
Hey, Sean.
I'm looking at the symptoms of all the symptoms of codependency, and as much as they are symptoms, you can be codependent on each of them. You can be codependent on dysfunctional boundaries. You can be codependent on reactivity. You can be codependent on caretaking, so on and so forth. Some people, for a lot of people, these are not symptoms. These are their reality.
And I completely agree to Sean. And two with that is in the opposite of it. And you look about the solution of codependency, and it's in improving your self-esteem. Well, if you have strong self-esteem, you can say no. You can use. You're exactly right, Scott. No, and problems with intimacy. You can advocate for yourself. Denial. You're okay with saying the truth and showing that you have flaws.
Ooh. Can I hop in for 1 second? Because that just reminded me of something I have on my whiteboard here. It's a quote I found from someone in the recovery community, but be authentic, surrender the outcome, and do authentic work. you surrender to the rejection. Okay, be authentic, surrender the outcome, and do the uncomfortable work. Be okay with being rejected. Be okay with the denial, the negative opinions of people. Be your true self and surrender to that. I think that is really a foundation of a lot of the stuff we're talking about. It's literally right on my whiteboard here. So
busting the stigma right now. That's all we're doing is busting the stigma for you.
Man.
I need you to make me a poster, Sarah. I need you to make me a poster.
That's it. So we're going to small plug for New York. We're going to Albany tomorrow for Stand Up for Recovery Day in Albany, New York. Come join us. And is like, what do I stand up for, right? Or we stand up for? We stand up for allowing people to be authentic, right? Like I have my sign right here, and like I'm like, oh man, what do I put on there? I stand up for being authentic, for my morals and values and what I believe in. I got to stand up for that. And saying no sometimes is me standing up. So that was great, Sarah. Thanks. So what does it look like, Crystal?
What does it look like? So what does codependency look like in your life? When your life revolves around doing things for the other person nonstop, all day, every day. When you put up with mental or physical abuse and or manipulation. Who's been there before? I'll say, yep, that was me. You are willing to sacrifice your friendships and relationships so you can focus on giving your enabler all of your attention. I mean, this was my life. Like most of my adult life in my relationships, this is what it looked like. I didn't do anything for myself. I didn't have the career that I wanted. I didn't do what I wanted to do on a daily basis. I just did what the other person wanted me to do. And I was completely controlled by them. And I must add that during COVID, being home on lockdown in a relationship, a codependent relationship, it was so much worse for me. It got really bad for me. I was so controlled. I wasn't allowed to leave the house. I mean, I shouldn't say allowed, but like it made me feel some type of way. And I felt guilty when I left the house, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. That's the issue. Like I'm not even doing anything wrong, but I felt like I was. Why? Why? Right? Like, why is that a thing?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's
Well,
crazy.
because your identity and whether or not you view yourself to be a good person is dependent upon the extent to which you serve somebody else and that they communicate that to you. You know, that's at least part of it. But something about this slide, I would just love to, you know, because of course we all work in recovery and substance use, take out person and just put in the word drug for all of these. So your life revolves around doing things for the drug. You put up with mental or physical abuse, manipulation for the drug. You sacrifice your relationships, etc., enabling your attention for the drug. And what I had said when we were talking about this, but it's kind of like a sort of jokey, but I do think it's true. When we think about the symptoms, you want control, you become nervous if people are spending time with other people. Your drug is always there with you. It's in your pocket, you know where it is. It's not going to go away. It's not going to reject you, right? Who here has been rejected by heroin? You know, no, your body might reject it. But so, you know, again, just looping into how these experiences in your early life with your relationships with people then kind of really easily segue into your relationship with the drugs. And I think a lot of times this codependency is overlooked because people focus on the drug use and they don't realize that this type of behavior is manifest in their lives when they were children, when they were teens, before substances ever came into the picture. This exact same behavior happened. It's just substances replaced the caretaker or whatever that person was in their life. And, you know, again, just thinking about prevention, you know, a big passion of mine is expanding prevention outside of chasing the substance and getting to the core of what's going on before the person picks up the substance to deal with whatever it is they've got going on, which I think kind of segues. I think the next slide is about healing. So I was like, I wanted to
I'm gonna go back to
plug
this
that
one.
in there. Okay.
Before we go on to healing, I just wanted to pop that one in quickly. These are just some more prompts to think about when identifying with codependency. So do you feel like a bad person when you make a mistake? We said that already. Do you have trouble asking for help? I know for me, that's a huge one. Do you have so many things going on at once that you can't do justice to any of them? You're spreading yourself way too thin because why? You're saying yes to everyone and everything. Right. You never say no. Do you have difficulty talking to people in authority, such as police or your boss, advocating for yourself, right? Sarah was talking about talking to your doctor, right? Like, do you advocate for yourself when it comes to things like that? Do you feel rejected when significant others spend time with their friends and not with you? Are you confused about who you are or where you're going with your life? Lack of self-identity, yet again. Are the opinions of others more important than your own? You know, how do you identify with any of these questions?
I would like to say about just going back to the concept of no very quickly, something that really helped me as I've been on this journey with no is my no gives way for my exuberant yes. So by saying no to something, it gives way for the yes that I really want to give. And that was something that was helpful for me in framing, is it gives me the opportunity for that yes that I'm really craving to say no to the thing that I just feel compelled to answer to. So
I love that, Sarah.
That's
It
deep.
makes you value when you get to say yes.
Yes.
It's
really deep.
actually your yes and your choice because you actually want to do that thing.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I like that. I like that.
So moving on to healing from codependency, as we've already, Brian has touched on this a little bit already. I think number one is educating, right? We have to educate ourselves. What is codependency and what does it mean to me? Like for me, the girl that was in denial about codependency for many, 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 many years, I now understand that my codependency was giving my happiness to everyone else. My happiness was in the hands of everyone else except for myself. I had no identity. I didn't understand what my own happiness even looked like because I was only happy if other people were happy with me. So being able to really touch on what is codependency and how you personally identify with it. Where does it come from in your life? Where does it stem from? Does it stem from your childhood? Is it from one of your parents? Is it generational? You know, where does it come from in your life? So educating ourselves with codependency and what this really means to you, right? And then moving on, if you feel like this is something that you identify with and it is something that you need to heal from, how are you going to do that? So for myself, when I was initially in recovery from addiction and I got an AA sponsor and we really started discussing codependency, instead of doing the AA 12 steps first, I did the CODA 12 steps first in order to heal myself from my codependency and then linking back to my addiction because it made so much more sense for me personally. I'm not saying that's everyone's journey, but for me personally, going through the CODA steps really helped me to identify. It really helped me to identify with my own trauma, my own things that needed to be healed and how to move forward and how to feel better about it. That was like a huge tool for me. It was amazing. Does anybody have anything that they want to add right now?
Well, I think too, and I know I jumped the gun on this talking about the solution, but it's that to me, 6 and 7 is refocus on self and building your own identity.
That's right.
Versus always looking for outside for approval, and where the healing really, really, the rubber meets the road on it.
Yeah, Brian, I think you said earlier, we're talking about inside work, right? The cravings and the obsessions that come with substance use, that's still at some point external, right? We're trying to fill a void within inside of us, and that codependency exists within inside of us. So we have to do internal work, like Crystal said, whether it's find a 12-step sponsor or a CODA sponsor. There's codependency support groups where individuals with lived experience from codependency can help navigate these steps with you to allow you to work on the inside to identify the things that we've previously discussed, to inevitably get you to the solution, which is to build your own identity and to recognize and identify that simply learning how to say no could be your solution, because you've never been able to say no. So all of the sequence of events have occurred thereafter. Go ahead, Brian.
And exciting. And what I just like Sarah said, she practices saying no. I mean, it's like that's beautiful. Like practicing, talk about working on the skills you need, practicing saying no, and being able to identify that, and then and realizing that when she says yes, that has that much more value. So yeah, putting those skills to work.
Absolutely.
So what do you do when you, in your opinion, Crystal, when in any of those steps you hit like a roadblock? Like, what do you recommend doing?
I mean, I feel it depends really what it is that you're having a roadblock with. But I mean, for me, I had a sponsor at the time, so I usually would call her because, you know, in the very early stages, I wasn't able to rely on myself and my own ideas yet because I don't feel like I had the confidence to do so. And I feel like the decisions that I was making in the early part of my recovery, I couldn't do without the help and support of someone else to guide me along the way and to encourage me to do the right thing. Leaving myself to my own vices at that time probably wasn't the best idea. I was still unsure of if I wanted to be in recovery. You know what I mean? Like, I still wanted to use sometimes because that was my comfortability, and, you know, my drug doesn't reject me. So I really left that to someone else. But if there wasn't someone that I could call, for me, my thing is always journaling. I'm a journaler. I write my thoughts and my feelings down. I do a lot of poetry. That is something that really, really helps me a lot.
I
I
think
hope
a
that
lot
helps.
Thank you.
too about the piece about kind of dysfunctional communication. Um, and obviously it's hard when you're early on in your journey, but being able to seek out people and build relationships with people that have your best interest in mind, that you can start to really work on that communication where you can openly discuss a situation you might be in. And when you're in the phases of you don't really trust yourself, you're not really sure if there's a red flag or is this my PTSD or what is going on, really identifying people that you can speak honestly and openly with that will provide you feedback that, you know, can help be a litmus test for where you're at, I think is immensely important. I think that, you know, one way that when you're trying to build those relationships, to sit and really consider with yourself, like, how do you feel when you're around that person? Do you feel energized after you spend time with that person, or do you feel drained? You know, do you feel lifted up and do you feel celebrated, or do you feel like there's some sort of competitive nature in the relationship? And I think it's really important. You know, it's kind of interesting because codependency takes place in relationships, but I think a lot of that healing also happens in relationships. And so many of you, I mean, on this call, right, are able to, in a professional capacity, provide that sort of safe space for individuals. Again, I'll never stop talking how important peer work is. For folks that aren't maybe connected to a peer yet, I think that there's things that, you know, there's sort of checklists that you can kind of go through to try to build up what a healthy relationship looks like, always keeping in mind that it's about how you feel about yourself when you're with that person. You know, I think that was something that was really helpful for me in the past couple of years. I feel really grateful, including folks on this call, to, like, you know, I'm surrounded by people that I do feel have my best interest in mind. And that's not easy to come by, but I do think that there's skills you can build to sort of get there. And practicing uncomfortable conversation, that going back to that quote that I said, you know, practicing being uncomfortable and learning to be rejected. This year, with my work with New York Matters, I was very lucky because it taught me a lot about codependency. It is a tough field to navigate with hospitals and things, and I really got a good dose of rejection this year, and it was almost like exposure therapy, you know. And over time, dealing with that rejection becomes easier. And, you know, through journaling is something that also helps me too. I learned to really not internalize that, and actually it kind of gave me strength, you know. And so those are just some things over the past year that I think I've thought about that have been helpful. Really being able to connect with people and identify with people that are safe, and practice that uncomfortable, difficult communication. And again, you know, we have all these people on the call here that can do that in a professional capacity, for folks. So link up with a peer if you can, if you don't have people in your lives right now that you can trust or you're not sure about.
You
So
definitely
much,
just
Sarah. That was
answered.
great.
You definitely just answered my second question, which was going to be, how do you prevent yourself from being codependent when asking for help? You definitely just answered that question. Thank you.
But I think it's really important also to keep in mind what you just said, Sarah, about, you know, let's pay attention to the relationships that we have in our lives, right? Are they healthy relationships? Are these people encouraging me and supporting me? Do they complement me in my life? Or are they just energy suckers, right? We all know the energy suckers. We all feel it, especially in the field that we work in. I see it from a mile away now. It's like, how was I so blind for so long? But that's such an important thing to keep in mind when we're dealing with people and whether or not we're involved in healthy relationships today. And, you know, I used to think like, oh, I have so many friends and I have so many people around me. No, My circle is very tiny today, and I'm very happy with that because they're healthy relationships that I have now. And the quality, right? Quality, not quantity. I'm all about that these days, because I don't have any more problems with setting those boundaries and saying, like, you're not healthy for me. I can't have you in my life, and I'm really sorry about that. And people that have been best friends of mine since I was a child are no longer a part of my life because it's not conducive to me and my lifestyle. So
Crystal, I had that same experience over the last year, and shout out to my fiance. She is an absolute warrior, and she's one of us. And because of my understanding of my codependency and my need to learn on how to have healthy relationships years into recovery, right? I'm still learning on how to have healthy relationships. So we sought outside counseling, like a peer. Sometimes you need a professional to help you identify where you're right and where you're wrong. And one of the things that came out of the relationship with my fiance and counseling is that, like you said, Crystal, my best friends from high school, my best friends from college, some family members, some coworkers.
family members,
Family members is a huge one.
huge.
If you're not aligning with who I am and where I'm going, and if you're not lifting me up and even if you're not lifting me up and you're keeping me here, you got to go, because I'm going this way.
Level up.
And learning you can love someone from a distance.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know,
Absolutely.
when I first started embarking on boundaries, for me, it was a lot of no contact stuff, particularly with family. That can be really hard. And what I learned was there are ways I can protect myself, have nuanced boundaries with individuals, and still love them from afar. It can help me deal with that guilt. And one other little thing that I want to say in terms of the exercises, the saying no, there's so much of mental health truly is because your brain is a muscle, faking it until you make it. So, just daily affirmation, say something nice to yourself in the morning, look at yourself, tell yourself that you love yourself. I don't know, dance dance for a couple minutes every day out in the sun, whatever it is. Act like you love yourself until you do, and you will end up there. And it's a lifelong thing. It's not linear. You're going to have setbacks, but we really can trick our brains more than we realize. And I'm a huge proponent of it, particularly when you're getting started. Just tell yourself you love yourself and you'll believe it one day.
It's really
But
aligning your mind with your heart. What you feel in your heart is what your mind's going to think, and what your mind thinks is what's in your heart. So fake it till you make it is really just about finding that point where your heart and your mind can match. So then you're walking with integrity.
Right.
You're not saying one thing and doing another, or you're not doing one thing and saying another. Is being true to your word. And the most important truth that you can have is to understand, identify, understand, and know who you are.
And your values.
And your values, right? Like, come on, people. We're gonna change together. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
do it.
I love
And
this sorry, super fast,
ahead,
but there's
go,
this
go.
quote, people always say you are who you surround yourself with, but take it another level. I just heard this recently and I love it. You are the nervous systems you surround yourself with. And I love thinking about that energetically. If you're with reactive people with anger issues, with, obsessive, whatever that it might be, that energy, the closest people you surround yourself, you're going to pick up on that jumpiness that came up on the slide. Being with people that have done the work to be emotionally regulated, to be able to work through conflict in a way that is healthy, that's extremely important. And yeah, sorry, I cut you off, Crystal, but it just
No, that's okay. Totally fine. I was just going to say that when we learn to love and respect ourselves, then other people also learn to love and respect us, because we only allow people to treat us the way that we allow people to treat us. So if I don't love myself, that comes out in every way. You see clearly that I don't love myself. But if I do love myself and I'm taking care of myself, the only people that I'm going to let in are people that treat me the same.
And
Go ahead, Brian.
it was exciting what you guys are talking about. And for me, it's in that when you're talking about the brain and just reestablishing new neural pathways of just gratefulness, just being great. When we talk about journaling and just writing 2 or 3 things what I'm grateful for, it changes my, the whole someone with a grateful heart will never use. It's the truth, and living in that living in gratefulness, and also being okay with not being perfect. Like I'm okay that I'm a flawed human being. I'm not perfect. I have mistakes, and I can lead with that now. And that's who I am, and that is part of being in that healthy space. So that from my standpoint of my recovery from my drug of choice, but also from my recovery and codependency.
And accepting yourself. That goes back to being authentic. Nobody is perfect. So if your goal is to be perfect, you're going to be doing some lying or hiding or whatever to uphold that image. And that's going to lead to intimacy problems, all of this. And that's also not perfection anyway. So what the heck are you doing?
Yeah.
Fake it till you make it, but it went all wrong.
Definitely,
It went all
from,
right, though. It went all right.
Definitely from the days when I worked for the rehab, they had a saying in there all the time, and I say this to people to this day: progress, not perfection. Like, you always strive for progress, never strive for perfection, because it's unrealistic. But progress was always realistic.
And that can come from that family, that family trauma of trying to be perfect, trying to be the perfect child. What where the conversation started with, oh, you're such a wise, and you're more mature beyond your years, and that perfectionism and trying to be perfect. And it's, man, a child should be flawed. So
someone trying to be perfect should also seek assistance and guidance and stuff, because they may need help too.
We were created with flaws. So if we don't recognize them, then we are not living, we can't live up to our greatest potential, because no one was born perfect. We were born with irregular traits and sins, if you want to call them, right? And it is what it is.
Because we're supposed to go through life and learn the lessons. Life is about learning the lessons, and without flaws, why would we ever make a mistake? We have to make mistake in order to grow, in order to understand, in order to have the acceptance and the awareness of all of these things, right? But being able to have the awareness now and accepting who I once was and who I am now and who I'm still becoming, that's the beauty of it all.
And it's funny because, we extend as codependent people all of this to the people that we're enabling, right? We're actually pretty well versed in looking over mistakes and rationalizing flaws and everything else like that. So we kind of have that toolkit already. It's about applying it to ourselves, which is typically the greatest challenge.
Definitely.
Instead of rationalizing mistakes, we have to learn from it. That's the difference between being codependent and actually growing and healing. We don't want to rationalize it. If we learn from it, we learn not to make those mistakes again. If we rationalize it, they're just going to keep happening.
So just to wrap up, I'm going to go back to this slide for one quick second. I just have a few resources here, and there's many, 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 many more resources, but these are just like the top ones that I personally have used. Codependent No More, the book by Melody Beattie, is amazing. She has a book and a workbook. To me, I feel like this is just scratching the surface of like, what is codependency and how do I identify with it? Facing Codependence is the second book that I read on codependency by Pia Melody. And it's what is it, where does it come from, and how it sabotages our lives. This book was my aha moment. I had so many aha moments through this book. It changed my perspective on myself. It changed my perspective. This is the book that took me out of denial, right? I was the codependent in denial. This is the book that took me out of denial and changed my perspective and really helped me solidify where my codependency stemmed from. That book changed my life. I've read it multiple times. I read it with my clients. It's a thing. It's a whole thing. If you haven't read it, please do. Again, on here, I have listed the CODA 12-step recovery program. I do have the 12 steps listed next. The language of letting go, Sarah mentioned earlier, daily affirmations, right? wake up, do a daily meditation, daily affirmations just about yourself. Like, I am deserving of love. I am deserving of respect. I am deserving of healthy boundaries. You know, I'm deserving of self-identity and self-esteem and all of those things, and placing value within ourselves again. That's a huge one. Language of letting go. It's a daily reading for 365 days for the year. And The New Codependent: Help and Guidance for Today's Generation by Melody B. She has series and series and series and series and series of codependency books. So there's a lot of great stuff. There's so many that are on Audible that you can just like listen to while you're driving around. That's like
I
my
was just about to ask that.
secret. I listen to them on Audible when I'm driving around. I'm really not that great on reading. Like, I'm not a lover of reading. So I am an Audible girl. I should have stock in Audible because that's the way I read. I listen to it and then I can rewind it if I need to, and like back up and listen to it again. And I feel like when I hear someone else saying it to me, I comprehend it better and it sinks in, you know. And if I need to make a note, then I'll make a note, obviously, when I'm not driving any longer. But for me, it's just what works. I just love Audible. And then you can listen to it again and again and again when it's in your library, you know, and you can share them with people.
Mhm.
And
Chris,
then I just,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you didn't have any of the slides, could you just repeat the questions that we asked in the beginning?
Sure.
Well, you
I
can.
just put up the CODA 12 steps if anybody was interested in looking at them, but it's really all the same things. It's just about the other person or relationships or the drug in your life, if you will, whatever that may be.
I'm gonna say, go back. I'm gonna take a picture of that.
Oh, sure.
Definitely take a picture of that because that's actually really good.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So here's the questions again.
So yeah, hit pause, grab your phone, take a picture of these questions, and if you're willing and honest to whatever capacity, answer them wherever you're at. And if you want further support or guidance, reach out to any of us on here, reach our agencies, reach out for support from CODA, from whoever. There's always someone willing to answer the phone. You just have to make sure you make the right phone call.
Right.
And you deserve to feel deserving of love, and the world deserves the authentic version of you. So, it's
You
possible.
deserve the authentic version of you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's it. Great knowledge, Sarah. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this month as we scratch the surface of codependency. And I think that we'll have to have a part 2 on codependency, because we didn't really even talk much detail on how it affects us. We just, gave a brief understanding of codependency and how it relates to substances and multiple disabilities as family members. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And my name's Scott. I am so grateful that I can be as authentic as I'm able to today, and I love myself ferociously on purpose.
My name is Crystal, and I love myself on purpose today. And thank you guys so much for having me yet again. And thank you for letting me share on this really heavy topic, but I'm so glad that we're going there. We're going there with it today. So stay tuned for what we have next.
My name is Sarah. I really love myself today, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. And I can't wait to talk again.
My name is Deshaun. It's always an honor to be on here talking to you guys and talking with everybody here on the podcast. And I love myself on purpose.
My name is Brian. Also honored to be here. Thank you for having me. And I am loving myself, my authentic, flawed self.
Yeah,
Purpose today.
that's right. All right. Peace and love, everybody. Stay tuned.